All right, I think we'll kick off. We've got 30 people online now, so it's very good to see you all here. So welcome to this Computer Art Society lecture about Fulldome. And really very pleased to welcome Professor Mike Phillips from IDAT. He's the director of IDAT at the University of Plymouth and also the Planetary Collegium. And Professor Dr. Isabella Bayer, who's the Professor of Immersive Media and Transmedia from the University of Applied Sciences at Lübeck, and Ben Stern and Phil Meyer from Bionova. And everyone today will be saying something about the wonderful medium that is Fulldome. And I think I've long wanted to build a bit of a bridge between CAS and the Fulldome community, and it's a very exciting area to be in at the moment. It's the idea of getting fully immersive imagery and sound inside a spherical space, indeed a hemisphere. And of course, that's been the goal of quite a few artists and visionaries over the years. And my own particular inspiration here, I'll just quickly share, is actually, here we are, if I can do it, is actually, of course, Stan van der Beek. And Stan van der Beek was the sort of instigator of the movie drone, which he built in 1963, and it lasted for 2 years in New York. And this was actually a repurposed grain silo that within which he projected these extraordinary images. You can see here the sort of the various different sort of formats and sources that he used. And his aim actually was not only to break through the sort of tyranny, as he felt, of just having a flat surface or a flat screen, but also this was his sort of goal with the movie drone, was to establish a network of dome theatres throughout the world, linked by satellites, that would actually share libraries and image banks of many different images, movies, and source files from a global media. And of course, that was kind of a living example of the medium is the message, as it were. So McLuhan's sort of concept really brought to life, and the global village, of course, in this form. So Van der Beek had a number of attempts at doing this, but it really was only possible much later on with the advent of digital imagery, digital projection, and of course the more widespread use of planetariums and planetarium domes. And that really is the background to the work that Mike firstly has been doing at Plymouth for some time now, using their own dome space within the campus. And Mike has got exciting news about the new project, which is actually taking place in Plymouth at the moment and will be open very shortly to bring an entire new dome theatre to life. A project that Ben and Phil have been very much working on together with Mike, and then Isabella's research and her investigations into the medium of the dome as well, I think, are most important here too, to sort of bring the content and the form together. So without further ado, I think, Isabella, we said that I think you go first. So over to you, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay. So let me open it. Yeah, so, okay, so welcome everybody. Very happy to be here. And, well, yes, we are Fine Sciences, Technische Hochschule Lübeck from Germany, and from the Lab for Immersive Media. So that's us. That's our newly built little wonderful dome. And I'm going to be talking about 360-degree concept creations throughout the centuries. The Planetarium, an immersive cupola environment, is the heart of many science centers, museums, exhibitions, and universities. And the medium evolved through the centuries, and so did, of course, as well the content creation. So what did we learn about dealing with this space, this amazing visual space? This is our little dome now here in the building stage. It's quite little, it's by 3.5 meters, but it has a very huge resolution, an 8K resolution. And once it darkens, this space becomes endless, it seems. So visual resolution is quite key. So if we have a look to the full HD in comparison in relation to 8K, so we have now that 8K, quite royal discipline for all artists to create for these spaces. So where did it all started? Which historical 360-degree concepts have been already realized that we can learn from, and how have they moved people emotionally, how they shift minds already in that times, and what we can draw from these concepts, how to use that enormous 8K visual space today. So we start very, very early. We are starting in 1650 to 1664. That was the very, very first planetarium, as Dr. Felix Lüning and I'm declaring it. That was a very, very first planetarium instrument. It has been built in Schleswig, in Gotha, and it has been realized with very, very minimalistic tools, wonderful wooden work. But it was not, of course, a projection planetarium. But many things have been realized with these tools there already. And one thing that was quite tremendous or quite fascinating was that flipping inside-outside concept. So on the outside, the whole Earth was mapped, or the known world in that time. And in the inside, the starry sky and the starry constellations have been mapped on the inside. 12 persons could be seated inside, and the whole thing could be rotated via a very, very huge effort building that here in the underground through water power. By means of water power, that whole thing could be rotated and being used quite interactively. And already in that time, they already had the idea and the aim to synchronous the real physical sky on the outside there, and to move it accordingly to the sky that was seen on the outside. And that are the recent photographies that I found in my research. So there was actually a period in Lübeck, that's where I'm placed nowadays, in 1945, how this Gotha Globus instrument still exists and is in being. Another concept was a 360-degree concept, was the georama. It was first built in Paris. And it was a huge rotunda building in which a sphere, globus, was placed, and the whole known map of the Earth was played on the inside. And via these stairways on that platform, through a group experience as well of random people that came in, the world could be traveled in that time. So obviously it was not an ordinary experience that everyone could do. It was very expensive to travel, or like nowadays, not really possible because of our virus going around. It was a wonderful experience that people could have in that time. Traveling Earth by the all-around view, or the all-around view, how they described it. It was this whole concept was so successful that it was rebuilt several times, and one time at the Leicester Square in London in 1851, where even a huger sphere was built, a huger staircase, and the whole map of the Earth that was known was again a whole lot plasticity with lower and higher areas to give the impression of all that knowledge that they had from all these different lands. This whole concept is quite very special, very unique experience that is being even rebuilt nowadays with Aga Assisi, which is an artist that paints this huge environments into rotunda buildings that they build in Pforzheim and in Berlin, and where he paints environments that are not historical environments of very historical moments to be experienced with that all-around eye again in these huge rotundas. So it's also a very, very present thing that is still happening, with still panoramic huge images that he's painting in this rotunda buildings. Oh, it was quite successful for a time, and then the cinema came in, and the whole thing was constructed down because people didn't visit these exhibitions anymore. The cinema was a new thing, and everywhere people went to cinemas. But at the World Exhibition in the 19th century, that this huge experience was built. So it was a very, very fascinating thing to do, and not many people had the possibility to do it. Was a balloon ascent. So what they've done in that time was through several cameras, they recorded on a balloon an ascent, and they've projected it in this huge area, a huge sublime experience, where they projected the video so that people who were standing on the platform would have that feeling of ascending, or the passage of leaving the ground into the sky. And it's quite interesting how bizarre it is that we tend to do now the same as artists or as media producers. We tend to do now the same, but showing it in the VR glasses. So this is an own project of mine, a recent work where we recorded where I recorded via drone with a 7 GoPro setup. Also that descent from the ground over a wind turbine that descend into the, but we were showing it in these VR glasses. So what a difference from that group sublime experience with this huge endless area to that bit of an isolating experience that everybody is quite personal, but only one person being in that VR glasses. So I think we should have this spatial sublime experiences as well in the domes. And the next experience, or the next 360-degree concept, which was very, very important, was the very first projection planetarium being realized on the roof of that size company for the Munich Museum, where this whole visual space was conquered for visual simulation of the starry sky and making the sky available to experiment. So we didn't have to wait for 100 years for celestial phenomena to happen, or any phenomena on the starry sky, but we could reproduce it, we could experiment with it, and we could repeat this experience many times until we learned what basically happened. So this was quite the first setting, right? So we had a star projector in the middle, which was projecting stars onto the inner outside of that cupola ceiling. And then, of course, many things in between happened, as Nick Lambert was telling, but then a huge breakthrough was around 2000. The age of 2000 was very, very important for every visual artist out there working in this 360-degree spaces, because the Hayden Planetarium opened first Fulldome Planetarium, and the Digital Universe Atlas was born. And that open visual creation to anything was now possible. And this whole concept of a Fulldome projection planetarium popped up now in all over the world, in all these different cities. So also in Kiel and Hamburg, where I was born into this whole planetarium world. And these were some of the institutions that I worked for, where we can see how the planetarium cupola ceiling here as a heart of the whole science center can be used, or at exhibition areas. So when we are looking to the creation process, so we were used to think spatially from the inside to the inner outside. And somehow it reminds me a little bit on a wallpaper approach. So we tried with very limited video projectors to project panoramas of the city skyline, to pick up people, to orient them in their local areas, and then to take them into the sky. And then in 2000, with the Fulldome theaters, there was this huge breakthrough where now we became from storytellers and from this approach to world builders. So we start to use 3D software to build any world and to move our visitors, through that vehicle or through that fisheye camera through these environments. So out of the center, we had to think how this world should look like and how we are to move the viewers through it so that they can gain the best of the experience possible. So when we see it a little bit compromised in that graph, so that was the first start, right, from the inner to the inner outside, to that huge breakthrough, to the digital universe atlas. So a huge virtual space where the whole knowledge of the universe, that all these institutions collected and hidden and developed this digital universe atlas, allowed any planetarium that would have the hardware and software to travel their public through the universe through these different Zoom passages. And that Zoom passages are quite important because I experienced many, many times how fast people would lose their relation and their imagination to space, because we are entering different scales in different light years. And the more abstract it began, I observed how often people would switch down, or their brains, because of efficiency, would switch down, and then they would fall asleep because they couldn't connect anymore to what they saw. And that's quite sad when that happens. So we should get better in giving relation chains. We could Powers of 10 was a concept, and they tried to pick it up in the development of the digital universe atlas, and we should still seek to give that relation chain in scales and to build good passages that people would still relate to what they see. So we started here somehow, and somehow it's a very, very important image for me. That was my own work that I've done for a show on the Sky Disk of Nebra. It's the oldest calendar that they found in Germany of the night sky from the Bronze Age. And people thought in that time that the world would be flat, and above them there would be this glass globe where the stars, the moon and the sun will be stick to it. Why they thought that? Because that was like their everyday experience, and in some way it's still the experience we have when we go outside, because we are stick to the ground of the Earth and we see the stars in the same distance, and our brain or our perception system is not able to see that the stars that we see on the black sky are in different distances. So we can solve this misconception through lived experience. So we can simulate a flight with the digital universe atlas, where we take them from the ground, move them through the star constellations, and then they see how they stretch aside, because those stars are in vast differences all over the universe. And then they understand, okay, wow, that's space, that's the experience of space, and that's how it really is, how they really are located. And another, so what's next? We have that digital universe atlas for content creators. What would be next? I was talking with many experts in this field, from Carter Emmert, from the Hayden Planetarium, over other colleagues, etc., over the years. And nowadays already, they are trying to make the digital universe atlas dynamic, so that phenomena that will happen on the sky would synchronous when it happens outside on the sky, would happen as well in the digital universe atlas. It will be a dynamic living thing. That would be the next step. And of course, we have the digital universe atlas and our Earth somewhere here, but we do not have the whole micro worlds and the whole micro universes. So that may be a next thing to go for, or the human body, etc., etc. Okay, and then in the creation process was the next very, very important development. So we conquered that space, and then we freed it also through these fabulous different institutions like SAT, like the Society of Arts and Technology, and many others. We freed that space from that planetarium astronomical route to become a non-space, a free space, where performances, interactive visualizations, etc., can happen. That is, for example, also a wonderful example of a wonderful artistic performance work. So, as a resume, what have we learned? The 300-degree spaces have been used for storytelling and for those mind-shifting experiences for over 200 years. From the first starry sky simulations, rotations of the sky, calendarized, for example, to first all around Earth topography and travel to ascents that are very special and not an ordinary experience that because we are somehow, stick to the ground when we walk around. So it's still something very, very special to happen. The simulation and experience with celestial bodies. We have the digital universe atlas that shows us the boundaries, or not even the boundaries, but expanding how far we can get, also with different areas, to diverse flights through data landscapes, which some tend to be dynamic and even synchron to the real sky outside. We learned that 360-degree space can become a knowledge container, which can be traveled, spatial traveled. And we learned that it can be and is a 3 non-space where the content and the behavior and what we do inside of it defines that space, what it becomes. It can be a teaching room, it can be a museum, it can be an artistic world, it can be a very personal experience. And yeah, so that is the resume. That is what I wanted to share. Thank you. Yeah, and that's our campus in Lübeck.
Well, Isabella, thank you so much for that tour through the at least 200, if not more, years of domes and their uses and the way that they're sort of evolving at the moment. It's really good to see that. So, Mike, talking about the present, can you give us give us a rundown of your work with IDAT and what's happening currently with Plymouth? Oh, Isabella, if you stop sharing as well.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Mike, over to
you.
Yay. Mike, you've been auto-muted.
Oh, yeah. Unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Okay. At the end of this, there's a special dome reveal, but I'm going to mention it in here as well, which Guy and Over are going to do with the new Market Hall development here in Plymouth, which is developed by Real Ideas Organisation. And as you said at the start, Nick, actually I haven't had that, working with Guy and Over is a great pleasure, and we have on and off for a long time now. In fact, they're redeveloping our planetarium as well into one of these new kind of spaces. But actually I haven't actually done much. It's more of a kind of, poke people occasionally. So it's not, I don't do any work. But so what I wanted to do was to talk about, following on from Isabella's presentation there, is why these domes are weird, and why, as you saw in the description of this talk, we're talking about liberating them from that particular history, I think, that Isabella talked about as well. It's been dominated for a long time by STEM subjects, and that kind of revolution that Isabella talked about there, which was the convergence of new technologies, new distribution platforms, new kind of software that we can use to develop these things, has made it available to artists, designers, content makers, that horrible word, creatives, who kind of in one sense were always there because they were the ones making the content for a lot of planetariums and a lot of science centers. But now there is quite a lot of shift going on with just accessibility and the democratization of those sort of technical processes. So I thought I'd just start with this kind of thing about domes and why they're kind of weirdly important. And you know, there's a number of circular things in the world, one of which is our eye. The retina is a dome. Lenses have always been circular. It's just that we choose to stick a rectangle on the back of them, but actually the world we see through these circles of our eyes onto the retina at the back is a hemisphere. It's a dome, and also the planet and that bit that you look out to is a dome. So there is this sort of very natural set of relationships with spherical perspective, which has been kind of compromised by a reliance on sort of Renaissance perspective, single point, vanishing point perspective. So also, I mean, you mentioned Van der Beek there, but around the same time, old Bucky here, he's often credited for the development of the dome, but actually, as Isabella revealed, it was actually in Zeiss in the 1930s, not the 1960s. And but there is this commonality between a dome being this space that communicates things. And here Bucky talks about this dynamically viewable and pictorial radio to all the world, this idea of the dome could be connected and streamed. And some of the work that we're currently doing with Rio, Guy Nova, and also a network of Fulldome people, some of whom are connected to the European Mobile Dome Labs, which I'll mention, is actually using game engine technologies to sort of superimpose domes. So we're all sharing the same engine, which of course that engine is the projected image. So there's a kind of shift going on in the way that we're realizing these kind of visions that Van der Beek had and Mr. Fuller had as well, which is quite, I think it feels very revolutionary, even though it's always been that aspiration. We can actually deliver some of these things. And this sort of shift, I think, that's going on here, as you can see, this is actually UniView, the Universal Atlas, which Isabella mentioned there in our dome, the Immersive Vision Theatre. But the IVT started out in Plymouth as a planetarium. In about 1967 it was built, and it was used to deliver star navigation, astral navigation to naval students down here in Plymouth. And of course that's very important because if you've ever been to Plymouth, which I know you have, Nick, it's a lot of cloud here and you can't actually see the stars. So you need a planetarium to actually see what's up there. And of course, you know, everybody looks at their mobile phones now, so that navigation wasn't necessary. The dome kind of it sort of fell out of use. It had a star ball, a Zeiss star ball in there, and we were able to convert it, not through, interestingly, not through the discipline of either astronomy or physics, which this normally sits within, but through collaboration with the earth sciences at the university, and they saw the potential for this for an experiential learning tool, so that they could actually collect content which was from the natural world, the data visualization, etc., and reveal this to students in this kind of space. We shifted some of those intentions, which were very much lens-based and camera-based, to focus more on that data collection and data visualization. And a lot of the work we do there is now fundamentally interdisciplinary, in that it's run by artists. We look after it in the School of Art, Design and Architecture, And we set that agenda, but in one sense, the interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary agenda is because this is useful to those other disciplines. So although I'm saying let's liberate the dome from the sciences, actually part of that liberation, I think, is an increase in the usefulness of the creative practices to reveal new kind of sets of relationships. As Isabella said, domes are all shapes and sizes. The one at the bottom there, I'm going to let Phil and Ben explain, which is the new one in Plymouth, the Market Hall Dome. The RIBT, it's a shame because it used to be a horizontal 180-degree dome, but as was the rage around 2010 onwards, there was this idea of tilting domes, having tiered seatings, and you fly into the dome. So our dome was tilted by 25 degrees with this tiered seating. It's got a 40-seater dome. But we've also, got other domes as well, as Isabella said there, these kind of pressure domes and also inflatable domes, which we've had that at Ravensbourne, I think. That bag of wind that we can take with us. And it sort of has opened new kinds of relationships as well. The inflatable dome there is actually in Vienna at the Angewand, where it set up a relationship for the European Mobile Dome Lab with Martin Kusch and Bruce Schnell from there, who led that EMDL project. And it culminated in funding from the European creative, the creative channel, the European funding, and it allowed us to bring together a collection of all sorts of weird people. Actually, we had performers, VJs, coders, game engine developers, really weird people like Guy Nova. We had sort of scientists in there as well, and it created a network of relationships between Dresden, Athens, led by Vienna, Plymouth, and also SAT in Montreal. And SAT in Montreal is, I think, a super cool place. Their work with alternative uses for the full dome, spherical perspective, has been really key in shifting a set of relationships. I think Dan Nefus was here in the viewing somewhere, and he was there at this event where we, after a series of workshops, development workshops, over the period of, was it a year, 2 years, we were able to demonstrate some of these findings. And the reason I want to talk about these now is because it was the flat floored dome, the liberation from seating and the tiered view and the flying forward that allows this space to become useful for performance, for choreography, for different kinds of interaction with that projected image. So, as Isabella said, this kind of, the world tends to stop where we look up into the sky, and some of the work we were doing in Plymouth involved collaborations with the microscopy unit, our atomic force microscopy, and the electron microscopy unit, where we were able to take data from atomic forces that hold molecules together and create height maps, which again, in terms of that transdisciplinary relationship, was really interesting, because most scientists look at these images of atomic force microscopy images on a quite a small screen, and what we were able to do is to place them in that. They're actually flying through these molecular landscapes, which kind of really shifted their sense of perspective on the smallest thing you can possibly imagine. What we did was we collected a load of data sets together. This is my MRI scan there on the top right, which actually became the environment that you flew through. This is part of it. And we also used in the, I think, is it 157 speakers they have at SAT, something like that, a massive sound system they have, which is a three-dimensional sound system. We were able to use the Lorentz forces to create a sonic environment for this space. Well, the Lorentz forces are the magnetic forces which are used to reveal the magnetic resonance within the body that sits within this. So you actually had a kind of fully immersive bodily experience within this low polygon structure here. We were also introduced simple game AI into this, which allowed interaction with objects and to collective navigation of the space. To do that, we used some devices that we constructed. These were some Internet of Things devices, which essentially created a 3D pointer into that space. They used an Android phone and sort of bolt-on Arduino stuff. These things could vibrate. They're almost like they were little chips off the low polygon surroundings. And this, again, I think is one of the kind of holy grails with these kind of immersive spaces. It's actually very difficult. You can do this now with a lot of VR kind of spaces, headsets. You've got controllers where you can move around that 3D space and point and collect things. But you do that in a multi-user space, this kind of shared virtual reality. It is a massive challenge to create a meaningful set of relationships with people, the collection of the crowd in the audience, and this kind of projected space that they're within. And to create this kind of recursive relationship is really, in many ways, it's the same kind of agenda that most interactive media arts people are trying to deal with. How do you show that cause and effect in these collective environments? It's really quite challenging. And this was an attempt at trying to do this, and we're still working on these kind of devices, which hopefully make some kind of meaningful sense of that. Bringing together all these different kinds of essentially scanning techniques. There was very little photography, very little lens media used in this. We were using MRI scans, we were using real-time scanning of bodies, which are then processed. Bodies of the audience were then processed within the space and played back within the space. Performers, which are interacting with physical and projected objects. Right the way down to kind of LiDAR and point cloud visualizations, and the other devices which allowed navigation. Sound was pre-recorded, it was also played live, it was also embedded in these kind of environments. So it became a kind of whole immersive experience for those who are performing in it, as well as those who were members of the audience. There you can see Phil just down the bottom there. This is a little bit from one of the 3 productions that we did. This is the SAT group. And this is a LiDAR, a kind of combination of LiDAR scans of a forest and also a physical space that some of these sort of narrative was played out in. And you would navigate through this using structures on the ground. So within this space here, you had a set of scenes that were played out within this kind of scan of a house, which was in the forest. It's very complex kind of assemblage of material, all of which was really quite, pushing these kind of boundaries of collection of data, the construction of experiences using that data, and then the ability to play it back within these spaces, to create some kind of meaningful experience, which was not at all scientific in its approach, very much an arts research-based agenda for this. Before I pass over to Guy and Ova, Phil and Ben there's one of the things that's been running in the background in the UK has been Fulldome UK, which has started out being an annual festival, then became a kind of biennial, and has moved. It's been quite nomadic in the locations it's been in, as well as being started off in Plymouth and the IBT with a very small community, moved up to Think Tank in Birmingham, and then it's been taken advantage of the goodwill and tested their goodwill, I think, at the National Space Centre in Leicester with the NSC Creative, who have been a fantastic partner through this time. And now it's moving to the space that Phil and Ben are going to talk about. And it'll be happening this year in October during those dates. And also, and you can find that information there on fulldome.org.uk. And also, as part of that event, we will be linking up content across 4 of the international festivals. There's Dome Fest West in Los Angeles. There's Fulldome Festival in Jena, which is where the Zeiss Planetarium is, linked to the Bauhaus, Plymouth, Fulldome UK, and also the Dome Under Festival in Melbourne, Australia. So suddenly that vision that Van der Beek and Buckminster Fuller had is kind of coming to Plymouth and a world near you as well. So I'll stop there and hand back to Nick. Thank you very much.
Mike, that was great. Thank you so much. It's you know, a huge insight into what IDAT's been doing, and also leads very nicely, I think, into Ben and Phil. So take it away, Ben and Phil.
So hi everyone, I'm Ben from Guynover, and my colleague Phil is also in this chat. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about Fulldome UK and then hand over to Phil to talk about Fulldome UK's new home. So yeah, we decided this year, inspired by others, I would say, but the idea came from our friends in LA and our friends in Germany. But the idea being that in an era where travel is looking a little bit dicey and also perhaps a little bit morally questionable than we might have thought it in the past with climate change, that trying to localize the events and synchronize the events so that everyone just goes to their local Fulldome Festival rather than visiting each other's would be a really good idea. So we've got this idea to collaborate on about 90 minutes of content over the course of the event. We're going to synchronize them as closely as possible, time zones permitting. The international meetings have already presented some challenges. So, and yeah, the idea is to do a kind of best of Earth event. So if anyone has an idea to make some Fulldome work and would like to submit it, there's information on various websites about that, and I can share some more in this talk. So one of the reasons we haven't done a Fulldome event since 2016 is that we have felt like we needed a new home. And thanks to some good people in Plymouth, one of whom is Mike, we've now got that new home, and we've actually been involved in building it. And I'm going to let Phil talk about that.
Okay, yes, so it's a lovely journey really, because back in 2007, I went to a conference hosted by Mike at the University of Plymouth that was all about Fulldome, and it was amazingly inspiring. In 2009, we held our first Fulldome Festival, which, just to explain, is a festival that celebrates the medium of dome in all its incarnations, as art, as research, as performance. And that was in 2009 at the University of Plymouth, the IVT, which Mike was talking about. And now it's like we have come full circle, because we have built a new dome in Plymouth. This is what you're looking at now. It is a 15-meter diameter dome. It is, as you can probably see, it comes all the way down to the floor. So most domes are 180 degrees. They are half a sphere, a hemisphere, because ultimately they just describe the heavens above. Whereas this dome that we have built is 210 degrees. It comes down below the equator line and down to the floor. This helps with a sense of immersion because you can see content in front of you and beside you. It's not merely above you. We have also gone with a flat floor, as you can see, similar to SAT in Montreal. I would say this is, we would fully acknowledge this venue has been inspired by what the SAT venue. So again, you know, very briefly, I'm just going to suggest my understanding of the word Fulldome, because we've been talking about it for 45 minutes, but just to clarify, I would say that, you know, obviously Isabella has given you the longer story arc, but if we think about 100 years ago when planetariums were using those lovely star balls, which are optomechanical systems, they are analog systems, they're fantastic at projecting stars, but they just do stars. Later on, perhaps even in the sort of 80s and 90s, people were adding a single video projector and projecting a rectangle onto the dome, and that might just provide additional information, some video information to sort of complement what you were mostly watching, which was the stars being projected by that lovely star ball optomechanical device. So once you had one projector adding data, people added more and more projectors and started blending them together until the point where you had enough projectors that you were covering the full dome. So really, full dome is when the entire surface of a dome space is projected using video projection. It then becomes a digital projection space, and that's the inflection point, because no longer is it about stars. You can tell any story you like once it's a fully digital dome. And we always feel like we're very grateful for the last 100 years of astronomy for developing these systems, but there are so many more stories to be told inside the full dome space. So just a little about this space, the Market Hall Dome in Devonport, in Plymouth. What you're looking at here, as I said, 15-meter diameter, 210 degrees if you start from the floor and go up to the top and back down the other side. We are using just 2 projectors, which are blended together to create that overall image. And then there is a 19.1 channel sound system. So that is a ring of 14 speakers, sort of somewhere above the head height. There's another ring of 4 speakers near the top, and then a final speaker, number 19, right on the top, right on the zenith of the dome, pointing straight down. This means we not only have a very sort of high resolution panoramic surround sound in a sort of 360-degree circle, as you would imagine surround sound to be, but we also have a vertical element. We can pan sound up and down as well as all around us. The 3-dimensionality of sound complements the 3-dimensionality of the video, and it is a very important element of immersion, a very important aspect of immersion. I mean, you just try watching the movie Jaws with the sound down and you'll realize how important audio is to immerse people. So this dome, again, from our experience working on the Fulldome Festival in various planetaria around the UK over the past decade, it's always been clear that while the planetariums are our closest cousin, shall we say, they're not our natural home, because ultimately planetariums are set up in a certain way to do stars. They often have this raked seating, and the problem with putting people in rows of seats is it creates a certain expectation in people's minds. People tend to think they've come to the theatre or come to the cinema and are often looking forwards. There's also a physiological element to it, right? We're not that good at looking above and directly behind us. So if you sit someone in a seat, they tend to not really look around inside the dome space. So that was one of the reasons, the inspirations to have this flat floor, is you can stand in the space, you can lie down in the space, you can have a music event in the space, you can, have theatre in the round. And it's really to really make it as blank a canvas as possible and not impose on the audience how they should interact with the space. So this is a 15-meter digital dome. It's one of the few domes in the world really that has been built from scratch, not as a planetarium. We're not reappropriating someone else's space. There are some excellent festivals that celebrate the full dome medium all around the world. As Ben explained, we are collaborating with several of those later this year. But I think I'm right in saying that all of those others events happen inside existing planetaria, whereas this is a purpose-built, not planetarium dome. It's a purpose-built art dome, you could say. So that makes it quite special both in the UK and in the world. This dome is in a historical building, the Market Hall in Devonport. There's a new wing that's been built which accommodates the dome, and it's really, really finished. Really, really nearly finished. I mean, the dome is done, the projectors are on, the sound works. It looks great in there. We're just waiting for the last little bit of the building to hand over, but a soft launch of the venue started this week, now that we have slightly lighter restrictions on movement in the UK. And this place will officially launch to the public in just about 2 months' time, on the weekend of the sort of around the 17th of July. So, you're all welcome to come and see it. It should be a venue, one of the most accessible venues for experiencing the full dome medium in the UK, if not in the world. I think that about covers it.
Well, Phil, Ben, I mean, it's tremendous to have seen this all evolve. I mean, I'm very privileged, I think, to have been party to some of the thinking that's gone into it. Obviously, I haven't yet seen I've seen the outside of the building, actually, on my previous visit to Plymouth. I've yet to go inside, so I'm very much looking forward to that. But, you know, it's an evolution not only of technology, but also of aesthetics. And I think, you know, we've seen that from Isabella's presentation, also from Mike's thinking as well, that, you know, this is informed by the sciences, but it sort of moves away very much into the area of visual and sonic arts. And I think the sonic aspect's very much as important. And also, as well, something else Isabella touched on right at the beginning was the contrast between sitting with a VR type headset on in a sort of isolated space versus actually being part of something that's in the round. And I think that's always been my attraction to domes, particularly, is that it's a collaborative space. It's a space within which you can feel surrounded by the imagery. And it's a bit different also to the cave and to the other type, you know, the other approaches to surround imagery as well. And again, that was something that very much attracted me to the concept of the dome.
And I would say as well, to a lot of people who have no idea what Full Dome is, we have begun more recently to describe it as social VR or shared VR. You know, we are very grateful to the VR community for developing so many tools and advancing the art and the understanding of spherical worlds. But we feel the dome is a nice way of immersing yourself in those worlds while still being connected with the people around you.
Definitely. And I think it's a convergence of so many things as well, but it's, you know, especially the real-time 3D graphics, but also, you know, the knowledge that's gone into actually understanding the spatial qualities of this unusual thing, and the auditory qualities too, because of course domes have very weird sound properties, and that's another issue, isn't it? I mean, trying to overcome that is another sort of thing. So I would very much like to say, if anyone has questions, now's the time to ask them. So handing over to the floor, if anyone would like to either raise their hand or stick something in the chat and we can talk to it, or unmute yourselves and ask any questions. Fire away, please.
Well, whilst people are thinking, could I just say that what's interesting about the Rio Dome as well, this dome in Plymouth, the Market Hall Dome, is that they're a social organization, a social kind of creative organization, you know, not for profit. Devonport itself is in an area of massive multiple deprivations in the UK, and it's quite interesting, I think, that initiative, that as well as being accessible to audiences, it will also be accessible to communities and artists and producers as well. That there's a very fresh approach to that, which, you know, I'm sure we'll need some kind of curating, and that will evolve over time. But that level of accessibility, I think, is going to be really surprising. And again, you know, all credit, as Phil said, to planetariums, but the endless sort of shows of stars that they are forced to do to maintain their buildings is going to be radically different in this space, where, you know, there will be downtime, there'll be open time, there'll be development time as well for content. Again, inspired by Sat in that approach.
Definitely. And I also remember going back to the early 2010s in Birmingham as well. The think tank Planetarium there did quite a bit of that, of outreach in terms of getting people in the community to sort of interact with the dome in a non sort of astronomical sense, and also bring in imagery and try and work with it in new ways. And I think that too. So, Sean's posing a question. So, Sean, if you'd like to unmute yourself. And by the way, thanks to Sean, as ever, for running the Zoom session on behalf of CAS. That's very good. So, thank you, Sean. Over to you.
Great. I had two questions, but you sort of answered the first one. I wanted to understand the difference between full dome and VR. And I understand, obviously, the group element to it, but as a multimedia experience, how does it differ? I don't know who's best to ask that to. So
I could answer it from the perspective of content creation. So you know, I'm teaching students to do production work and storytelling for Fulldome, VR, and augmented reality. So for all these, you know, different wonderful tools, and a huge difference. An easy difference also in the content creation is that you have a half dome, a half sphere that you need to render, with a fisheye camera. VR, you have the whole sphere. So you have that whole ground which is underneath as well that you need to render, to calculate as well. And you have a whole different format. So you have an equirectangular format with which you work, for example, in compositing tools like After Effects or Nuke or whatever those out there. And then, so it's a wrap up into this equirectangular format, which then wraps again into this sphere. So yeah, that's something that you need to think around if you tend to produce, for example, a movie, an environment, a game to be displayed in the dome, or also in the whole sphere.
So in terms of producing the content, would you use the same, broadly speaking, the same content creation tools, but the rendering of the model, the rendering of the environment is different? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the rendering is different. It needs to calculate a lot more, because you don't need only the half of it for the dome, but the whole sphere. And well, a very interesting is as well that actually if you render the whole sphere for VR, so you can start with VR and then you can choose a wonderful perspective for the full dome in the way how you shift the camera around to get a lot of the horizon, or how much horizon you tend to squeeze into this half of the sphere.
Yeah, so
it would be better to work that way around.
I would add as well that there is a skill set overlap, because both VR and full dome, the key thing really is that they are frameless, which is actually quite radical. Almost everything else we perceive as a frame, whether it's looking through a window, looking at a painting in a frame, looking at a cinema or television screen, the theatrical proscenium arch, everything is always framed. And all of the storytelling is about an actor walking in stage left and exiting stage right. And suddenly you have no frame. So from a creation point of view, you have to think, how do I introduce objects to the audience? Because they can't sneak in from off stage. There is no frame. And that's quite radical from an artistic point of view, and means that really there's much less. We talk about this a lot, and we've been talking about this even for more than a decade, that it's a little bit of the Wild West. It is much less sort of scripted how to make dome and VR content, rather than say making filmmaking. Filmmaking has this enormous history, but it's quite well defined now. What I would say also just about our dome, or this particular Market Hall dome in Plymouth, is slightly significant that it's more than 180. It's 210. So it's somewhere between the hemisphere, the heavens above, and the full 360 sphere. And the particular software, the media server that runs the dome, is comfortable playing back either full dome content, which tends to be a sort of fisheye image. If you imagine a polar coordinate grid where the center of the screen represents directly above you and the edges represent the floor. That's what we call a polar grid, or a full dome master, a fisheye image. We can play those live like most other domes, but we can also play the equirectangular format, which is the common format for dome. And we can just play that as a video stream and warp it appropriately to map onto the dome live. We don't have to pre-process that. So if someone has a VR app that is able to output equirectangular, we can play that straight into the dome, onto the dome as well.
So for example, I have a 360 camera, and if you look at the raw image, it is, like you say, it's that polar coordinates sort of highly distorted.
Yeah,
that's sort of the input, and the dome itself removes the distortion.
To be honest, this is one of the things I always think is quite funny. I think if you imagine a 180-degree fisheye lens image, it's a massively distorted image of the world. And you project that onto a dome that is also a massively distorted curved screen. And what happens? The two distortions cancel each other out. It's easier for brain to say, oh, everything's fine again. The straight lines have become straight again. So it's easier for your brain to sort of treat those two massive distortions as an undistorted image.
And then very briefly, then we've got a few other questions have popped up. Access to your dome. How, as a content creator, how does that work? Are you looking for collaborators?
We should maybe say, we're saying our dome, like, because we built it, but sadly we don't own it. So as much as I would like to, or maybe I wouldn't, I'm not sure. But anyway, the Dome is actually run and managed by Real Ideas. So they're a Devon and Cornwall based community interest company, which means that they run buildings, and they're yeah, I mean, we can introduce you, we can send you to them. There's a whole sort of onboarding scheme being developed for like artists to come and bring their work. But yeah, I think I can give you some contact details, or via Nick, we can get some contact details to anyone.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put the link. Oh, someone's already beat me to it.
All right. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Mike. Yes. So yeah, also
they're very much saying, please come and collaborate. Please come and experiment. It doesn't just want to be a performance space like a cinema or a theatre. They want it to be a creation and experiment place. So it's very open for people to come and play.
Living in Leicester, of course, there is the Fulldome at the National Space Centre. Do these operate on the same standard? So content created, if I managed to get access to that screen, I could bring down to you?
Yes, the common standard for Dome is the Dome Master, which is often just a sequence of frames. So it looks like a square image with a circle in the middle. In fact, rather like Ian Wilcock's image that I'm looking at right now. And they're easily transported, on a hard drive or across the internet, and often as a frame sequence. Now, each venue may have its own flavor of media server, which is a fancy way of saying a computer that plays video. And they may need to process it for their local venue, but ultimately it's just a frame sequence. It's just a series of circular images at 30 frames or maybe 60 frames a second that you can pass around. More specifically, the media server, the particular flavor of media server, the particular software we're running in the Dome in Devonport is also the same as the one in the National Space Centre in Leicester. What that means is you can literally take the encoded film, the rendered film, and it will just play. So there's no re-encoding or processing of the source. But there's a kind of agreed master format for Dome. And if you pass the masters around, every Dome can convert that into something suitable for playback. Of course, the final point I'd make on that is that these days we don't just think about linear media. We don't think about video files and frame sequences. The wonderful thing is that technology is on our side. And once upon a time, you may have needed 7 or 10 projectors to cover an entire dome to get the brightness and the resolution. And you may have needed 7 or 10 computers to drive that, literally one computer for each projector. So you've got a network of computers doing each projector, an audio server, and maybe another computer that keeps all the other 10 in sync. These days, computers are so powerful that a powerful desktop computer, standard components really, workstation computer, can run a whole dome on its own. Now that's great for 2 reasons. One, it's cheaper. You're not trying to maintain 7 computers running. You just need to have one to stay running for the night. But the other thing is you can now do things that are interactive, that aren't possible to do so easily distributed across multiple computers. So you can run Unreal Engine live on the dome. You can run Unity live on the dome. There's a number of generative and interactive softwares now and game engines that literally will natively run in the dome for you.
Excellent.
It's
All right.
also worth saying, like in terms of access to that dome, because there's been a couple of questions about that we've designed it to kind of be accessible. So there is a high quality video capture card. So if you're working in whatever system you want to, you can just come along and plug in an HDMI cable and off you go. And similarly, the audio system, although it addresses 19.1 channels, you can come along with, say, something more common or garden like 5.1, plug it in, and it will be distributed to that 19.1 system. So
it's good to hear. No, I think it's good to know that domes are becoming more approachable. I know that not so long ago there were lots of different standards or different ways of doing things, so they are converging in new ways, which is good. Now, a question from Carl. So I know you've been asked, waiting to ask that, Carl.
Fulldome standards link into the chat as well.
That's great. Thank you, Dan. Yes, and good to see you as well. Yeah. So, Carl, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for such a great panel. So, yeah, my question's around the health benefits of domes, both in terms of the content possible and also the architecture itself. I'm thinking of things like peripheral vision exercises and the fact that we're all so locked into our tiny little mobile phone screens, destroying our peripheral vision. So by default in a dome, you're practicing peripheral vision. And I'm wondering about things like the overview effect and the benefits there, and whether there's been any research into trying to produce the overview effect in a dome.
I have to say that, you know, I have had that effect. There are a lot of beautiful full dome films. And again, although we spent most of the last hour talking about alternatives to astronomy, there are certainly some films where you start off on planet Earth as a computer generated experience and you start going out and out and out. And you pass our own solar system, then you pass our own local star systems, and you know, you just keep going. And I think it's a very grounding experience, actually. You know, for 20, 30 minutes, you're like, okay, yeah, maybe my problems aren't so big on a global, you know, cosmic scale. And the fact that one is able to travel light years in seconds, it can be quite profound. Equally, going down, you know, there's a beautiful film called Expedition Reef, where you really, it's like you're on the greatest ever scuba dive, you know, and it's photorealistic. We know the people who made the film, but I have to pinch myself, I'm not watching a real film. The giveaway that it's not real is that the fish are too well choreographed, you know, they pass the camera perfectly. But you come away from that film awestruck by the beauty of the reefs. And it also is telling a story about how they're endangered. And you come out feeling wowed and angry, and it's a call to action. And Dome can do that. Dome can make you feel, you know, not just tell you a story, but make you feel a story. It's quite a sort of, can be a profound experience. I often say it's like, you know, Alice Through the Looking Glass. When Dome is done right, the dome ceases to be a space. You're just looking up into the infinite. And it's a very powerful medium. What you say about peripheral vision is very key. We tend to refer to it as vection. If everyone knows the word vection, I'll just repeat it. It's that feeling, you know, when you're in the train station, sat in the train, and the train in the platform next to you pulls out, and it pulls forward, and you think you're rolling backwards for a second. It's the power of movement in your peripheral vision. And you have to be very, because it's so powerful, you have to be very careful how you use that in Dome, because you can induce motion sickness if you don't respect the fact that you are overwhelming people's field of view. There's no, again, you don't have a frame. There's no like, oh, don't worry, it's just a bit of video moving, but the world is staying still. When you're in a dome, the whole world moves, and it's very powerful.
I could just point, I put a link in the chat there to a project we were involved with called SWAPTON, the Southwest Korea Technology Network, where we had a bunch of fellows funded to do research in immersion 2-3 years ago now. And that's looking at someone there like Jane Gauntlet's work, which was dealing with neurological issues and health issues and mental well-being in some of these prototypes and some of these immersive experiences as well. So I think some of her work was using VR, but again, I think that can map on to it. Personally, I think
another amazing health story, wasn't it, was another project that SAT in Montreal worked on, which was actually a hospital for children, a burns unit for children suffering, who've suffered terrible burns. And as you know, with burns, often the pain is almost untreatable. And a lot of these children have to stay flat on their back for months on end as the wounds heal, and they're staring up at a blank ceiling at fluorescent lighting. And they worked on a project where they put a dome above these burns victims' children and took them to other places. And I can't fully tell you the whole story, but there was some research behind it, and they found when the children were taken to other spaces by dome, their perception of their pain levels went down. They needed less painkillers. They could be transported out for a moment from their cells.
What I wanted also to add is that it's quite wonderful to work with that periphery and foveal vision. So foveal vision is quite focused in one very specific little point where we can see our environment sharp, and the same happens in the dome. And because we are updating and we are so good in reconstructing the whole environment in our mind, we don't have to actually turn around to check if there's really that cupboard there. I just know it's there, right? Because it's reconstructed in my mind. So you can play and challenge that perception, of course, in the dome very, very well, in that you very much slow down the movement of the periphery objects that are around you in a very, very slow movement, nearly not noticeable. But when you pay attention, you would notice, and it will do something to you and to how you reconstruct that environment. So there's, there are wonderful possibilities to play around with it.
Thanks very much, guys. I just wanted to come back to Michael because I think he was about to say something, but he got cut off. Michael, you were saying something personally?
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to say doing that EMDL project nearly killed me. So I think making dome content might not be the same as experiencing it. Just putting that in there. Yeah.
Fair point. Thanks, guys.
Okay. Do we have any other questions, please? Any other questions while we're here? I mean, how many people here have experienced Fulldome? I can spot a few who I know are sort of Fulldome pros, etc. But how many other people have experienced it or have thoughts on the medium? Well, if you haven't, I thoroughly recommend you get to see one of your local domes, or indeed get down to Plymouth if you can when the theatre opens. Good.
And Nick, right. I've just got a little comment. Hi, really interesting talk. First time I've been aware of Fulldome, really. But just a few years ago, I took part in an event in Deptford for the local community called Smash Fest. And as part of that, I worked with some of the local kids to build a planetarium dome. It was very small compared to Fulldome. It was 5 meters diameter, but we built it out of materials we could get from Screwfix down the road, and one projector and a security mirror. And you got pretty good, I mean, it's nowhere near the quality, of course, of Fulldome, but you got pretty good experience. And we built it in the library at Deptford. And it was fairly small, just under 5 meters. So the kids had to crawl to get in, and just sat on the floor inside, so no seating or anything like that. And it's interesting because it's what one of the speakers was saying, that thing about having the flat floor was really interesting, and particularly having it actually as a really small dome, lying on the ground inside. Most of them tended to lie or sit sort of cross-legged on the ground, and you're able to sort of look around a lot more and experience it. And the thing I found was I was given astronomy talks, classic kind of constellation kind of talks, but in quite an old-fashioned way, which the kids actually really loved, because most of them have never seen the sky properly living in London. But in the breaks in between, my screensaver came on and I would have a rest lying down in the middle of the dome. And it is very trippy lying in the middle of a dome on your own, with all this space around. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this full-size Fulldome. But just wanted to say that the dome, even the small homemade dome, I think it cost us less than 100 quid to build, plus one projector. Even something really homemade like that can be really quite an experience, and something that might be worth doing with students if people want to kind of explore this before, if they don't have access to a full dome, they might like to sort of do something along those lines. Anyway, just.
No, definitely. I think that is the advantage now. The technology is becoming more widespread, but it's able to be deployed in all sorts of places. And I think, as you said, even with a reasonably sort of okay projector and a mirror, there's quite a bit that can be achieved. I mean, that's the Newtonian dome, isn't it? Using a single point and a single projector. A lot is possible.
It was a security mirror, the hemispherical mirrors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Graham, unmute yourself. Have you got a question, Graham? You were waving at the camera. I thought you were gesturing at us. So.
No, I was just. It was just the light was getting dark, so I was sticking a bit more light on myself. I don't need.
Oh, right. I mean, I was going to say, perhaps with your EVA hat on, EVA London. I mean, it'd be good to have a Fulldome session at some point for EVA.
Absolutely. We're always a little late to pick up on these things because our conference is in 2 2 months' time. But this sort of stuff is really, really important. And, anyone who's been presenting today who would like to do a paper for next year or something like that, or would like to get involved with EVA London, would love it. This is absolutely a future, and it's, I went to the Planetarium in Baker Street when I was a kid, and this sort of stuff is just magic. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and sad in many ways the Planetarium's no longer in its original location, although of course there's a nice new one now in the Greenwich area, but nonetheless it was quite iconic, wasn't it, at the time?
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon, the original sort of surround mix, was done in the Planetarium, which is quite impressive for its era, definitely. I'm just putting in a quick plug for EVA London this year as well, for those who'd like to come. I mean, it'll give you an idea about the format and the way that we run the conference. And I think next year we'll be doing a combination of in-person and online. I think we'll be sort of combining the two. Fingers crossed.
I would say also, getting back to Alexander's point, I completely agree. I mean, we're very excited about this purpose-built, permanent art dome. That's being built in Plymouth, or has been built in Plymouth. But certainly our experience over the last, 10, even 15 years has been much more, DIY approach and taking domes to people. So, we've put them in the back of a van and assembled them wherever they'll have us over many years. And also even to music festivals, just taking them, because again, it's that sort of, our passion is like, this stuff is really cool. It can't just be locked away in planetariums. We have to get it out to broader audiences, really. Yeah. Well,
on that note, Phil and Ben, can I ask about your own dome, the one you have in London? What's the current status of that at the moment?
Well, of course, due to COVID, it's not doing a lot, but we do happen to also have an 18-meter diameter dome that we designed and built to be a touring event space. It lives in a 20-foot shipping container. It's been around most of the UK and Europe over the years, and it's currently tucked away in its box. So that's a full dome that's like a TARDIS. This little 6-meter long box gets dropped off by a truck, and out of it comes an 18-meter planetarium. Yeah.
Well, of course, we've got lovely connections with the Barbican and with BCS Moorgate, and perhaps one day we can talk more about how we could actually join lots of things up and work with all the people who are involved with these.
Yeah, because if there was a way to have a temporary full dome in London and then link that up to Plymouth and the other domes as you proposed before, that would be quite something to put together.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have any further questions, please? And anyone else?
Yes, I had my hand up. Can you hear me? I'm muted. Yeah. I've been involved in sort of domey things with SIGGRAPH for a long time, and maybe College Arts as well. And we realised it was very difficult for the software and having access. And this is really great to feel that we're moving on, because I think everybody was very enthusiastic about it, but they were going like, how do we do this? So anyway. That's
and that's the thing, ultimately the technology is a sort of democratizing force. I'm not saying anyone in the world can afford to do this, but anyone with a contemporary laptop can now put video on a dome. That's all you need now.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else? Any further questions? I'm just looking through both sets of people just to see. Well, if that's the case, thank you very much. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Phil. It's been tremendous, I think, to understand really what's been developing in Plymouth and elsewhere, and also how Fulldome is coming together. So I'm very, very pleased for the next stage. Obviously, I've got reasons to be in Plymouth myself, so I'm hoping to be down there in the not too distant. But I can thoroughly recommend it for a trip once we're able to travel a bit more, and it'll be well worth seeing the Market Dome and the Market Hall, I should say, and the Full Dome within it. So really looking forward to that.
I would say from July it's going to be open to the public, and the big event, our festival, which is a 3-day celebration of all things dome, that's coming in October. Yes.
Brilliant. And thank you all. Thanks to the Computer Arts Society, and thank you, Sean, for putting this online as ever. And the recording will be on YouTube if you want to recommend it to anyone as well. Okay. All the very best. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys.